You had mentioned that, people are wary of what we do. It's naturally the tip of the spear. You have to use deception to a degree. Either you deceive your source or you deceive your audience. The problem with journalism and the reason why it's in decline is because these leakers, these sources in government and elsewhere intentionally transmit stuff to the media and they parrot it to the masses, i.e. Jeff Zucker saying we don't investigate what we're told. And that's what has been referred to as a pseudo event. They create something, they transmit it unquestionably, and there's the economic factor. There's a symbiotic relationship between people in power. What we do at Veritas is we go undercover and we completely defy the narrative. And most networks don't want to air it because it's risky, because it's questioning the normative order of things. It's easier to do little videos about squirrels on skateboards. Now, I did this big story during the election. Bob Creamer resigned from the Hillary Clinton campaign, and a lot of these companies say, we're afraid that if Hillary Clinton wins, she'll take away our FCC license. So it's this economic issue that is inherent in media, and it requires independent people to do something about it because the networks are not going to do something about it. They are in the business of generating a profit.
It's so fascinating to me because it's like they're not even in the business. Right, I get it. So they're in the business of making a profit, and that's fine. That is what business is. But they're not even in the business of pretending anymore because it's like during the whole Mueller investigation, every week there was another leak to the New York Times, and it's always an anonymous leak. And then for the last 2 years, they ran anonymous leak stories. And it's like, shouldn't somebody have been investigating why the Mueller operation is leaking? That actually would have been a story.
Right.
Where was that story out of the New York Times?
Well, they had James Clapper and John Brennan. I mean, these are intelligence...
James Clapper, who lied under oath.
These are intelligence agency people, and maybe not the most always ethical people, and they're just parroting what they're told on TV. When things are, and again, I go back to this whole distinction, and because when you report from a podium, when you say something at a press conference, the damage to society done by broadcasting what you are told on the record is often more pernicious than the damage that, say, I do by deceiving some guy in a bar so that I can get the truth out of them. It is a huge difference, and I think that journalists tend to be, you sort of have to play confidence games. You have to seduce your source, so to speak. But there's a relationship between sources and the media that I think has become corrupt. I think that the anonymous source, the reliance upon anonymous sources has become corrupted. You look at Bob Woodward, legendary reporter. I think he's a great journalist. By the way, I don't think these journalists are bad journalists. I don't even think they're bad people. I think they're part of an industrial system of production that manufactures the public's consent. But you look at Bob Woodward. He writes a book called Fear, and he uses quotes secondhand from anonymous sources on background, on deep background, hearsay quotes, and then he recreates events, and he puts those events in quotation marks. And I get attacked for selective editing. I don't report anything unless you can hear and see it come out of the person's own mouth. So I think that journalism has become corrupted due to this over-reliance upon sources, anonymous sources especially, and I think that that's why we need videotapes.
I literally remember being in like junior high school and watching CNN, and they would say a source on Capitol Hill, and I would always think this is insane. A source on Capitol Hill, anyone can be on Capitol Hill. It could be the guy that's walking his dog on Capitol Hill, who's the janitor for the fast food joint. Like,
we don't
he's
see
a source.
We don't see
Hill.
that source's face.
Yeah.
We don't know what motivates that person. We don't know what words were used by that source.
We don't know if that person exists.
We don't know if that person exists. I mean, can you imagine if I said there are sources inside CNN who says that Jeff Zucker said? They'd call me a liar.
Yeah.
And there's an analogy here. I heard someone say that when you use an anonymous source, it's like you're taking withdrawal out of a bank account of credibility, but you have to deposit into the bank account trust with the audience. And nowadays we don't see these anonymous sources. We see an over-reliance upon, and every time you actually open the reporter's notebook, every time you look at the transcript, every time you see the raw data, there is a there is a difference between what you are told and by the people that are asking you to trust them.
Yeah.
But that's the bottom line. These media companies don't trust us with the raw information. They don't want us to have the raw, unfiltered truth. They need to propagandize us with their version of it.
Yeah, it's crazy once you see it, right? Like once you really clearly see it. Like I was actually in the green room with Jordan Peterson while he was being interviewed by Nellie Bowles, who was the author at the New York Times, who made that whole brouhaha about enforced monogamy.
Yeah.
And it's like, that is not what this conversation was about. Or I had a whole day here, literally an entire day from 8 a.m. to about 8 p.m. with a journalist from Der Spiegel, who then wrote a piece about me and labeled me the grand illusionist of the alt-right.
Yeah, they leave their labels.
And you know what
right?
they did? There's a law, I didn't know this at the time, but there's a law in Germany that if you're going to print something, a quote from somebody, you have to get the quote cleared. So he spends all day with me, hours of talking, hours and hours and hours. He doesn't quote me once in a piece. I mean, that's the level that
What
these
is that
guys-
if not selective editing?
Yeah.
They called me the master of ceremonies instead of an anchor. They used master of ceremonies. I mean, it's just like what the Washington Post guy. There's another
sounds
guy,
like Grandmaster,
The
you know what I
Washington
mean?
Post has printed like 5 retractions just in reporting about me. It's like these guys have the audacity to claim that I'm a liar. In one article, they said what the latest Project Veritas video leaves out. And the actual fact that I allegedly left out was that this CNN producer that we recorded was based in Atlanta. Supposedly this was a big fact, but I didn't leave it out. It was in the video. The Washington Post had to print a retraction. That they didn't change the headline, what the video left out. They retracted the entire thing. There's another thing in the Washington Post about this book, Fear, and there was a quote that said, "There's no evidence that he did not say the things attributed to him," in referencing. There's no evidence he did not say.
Wow, that's pretty good.
But this is, I mean, we live in this weird world, and I think that videotape cuts through all the propaganda like a hot knife through butter. If you catch these people on videotape, they're forced to address it. And I think that video is that's why we choose the medium of video, because words do not transfix in a way that video does. And I think that words are frankly, the propagandist's tool, because they put you in a box by calling you names like that, by calling me masters of ceremonies, by calling you what you were. You're not what that is.
Yeah.
You are you.
God, I know we could trade these stories all day long. I'll just give you one more. But that same reporter from New York Times, Nellie Bowles, she wrote the story when Peterson and I left Patreon. They actually did a story on it, which was quite shocking. It's a horrible story filled with factual errors. But in there's a quote from the head of Trust and Safety at Patreon where she says, you know, you're not allowed to say these words on our platform, except, so as I'm sure you know, Carl Benjamin Sarganoak never said those words on their platform. I contacted the author, and it's like she just doesn't care. And she knows she's not going to get fired, and why even tell the truth? So it's like they just don't
One
stop.
thing that people are doing in more frequency is recording their interviews with these people. That and that's something that I would encourage, as long as it's legal to do so.
Yeah.
But you're on the record, so it's legal because they're consenting to the conversation, even in California. And we had one individual inside CNN record Alison Camerana. She did this long panel discussion about voter fraud. They cut the tape right before the guy actually brought up instances. So something that people are doing now is they're audio recording these interviews for that reason and releasing the full interview on YouTube.
Right, so we've seen a lot of that actually. Tommy Robinson has done that.
Right.
This guy Avi Yemeni has done that with
Yes.
this Jim Jeffries
I would not.
video.
I would implore your audience never do an interview with the press unless you audio tape it, and that's for your own protection.